Peace, love, and life, family. It's your girl, Morgan Renee Myers, tuning in for the last chapter of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. We're on chapter 12. It's been fun reading for y'all. She has a sequel to this book called Let the Circle Be Unbroken. And I know some of you may not care because you're just reading it for school, but I'm going to be reading this too. So when I finish, if you want to, most of you that have subscribed to my channel have been coming for this. So I would encourage you to go ahead and take a listen to these too, or check the book out at your local library and read along with me just to see how the rest of the story goes. I am talking to my YouTubers right now. I'm on my Facebook Live, but I download these and upload them to my YouTube, and I have a whole bunch of youth on my channel. So I'm a little confused. I'm 28. I don't understand some of the stuff y'all do. Most of you have been leaving comments asking me to shout you out. I've done that against my will because y'all find joy in it. But I don't understand this leaving first comment, second comment. It got all the way up to somebody saying sixth comment. Why does that matter? Who cares what number on the comment thread you're on? Like, why does that matter to y'all? I just want y'all to know that you don't have to do that in life. Like, that doesn't matter what place you come in. Shouldn't matter to you or other people as long as you're doing what you gotta do. And I'm not talking about just leaving comments, but in life in general, I feel like that stems from the need to be accepted or being in the first few whatever. Like, you don't have to try and compete with people unless you're competing intentionally, and even if you lose or don't come in within the first few people, life will go on. Okay, so I don't understand that first comments, his comments. I don't care. I don't know why you care. No offense. All right, let's get into this last chapter, chapter 12 of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. So last chapter we was reading, the last thing that happened was TJ coming to their door in the middle of the night needing help to get home because he been hanging with them White Sims boys, RW and Melvin. And they go into the shop in Strawberry and steal a gun and hurt, was it the Barnetts? He hurt the husband and the wife and stole some stuff, and now they done blamed it on TJ, and so all the Wallaces and stuff then surrounded his house, and Cassie is supposed to be running home to get Papa to tell him what happened. When we neared the house, the dull glow of a kerosene lamp was shining faintly from the boys' room. You suppose they already know? Sorry guys, my alarm. My bad. You suppose they already know? Christopher John asked breathlessly as we ran up the lawn. Didn't know about that, I said, but they know we ain't where we supposed to be. We ran noisily up onto the porch and flung open the unlatched door. Mama and Big Ma, standing with Mr. Morrison near the foot of the bed, turned as we entered, and Big Ma cried, Lord, there they is. Where have you been? Mama demanded, her face strangely stricken. What do you mean running around out there this time of night? Before we could answer either question, Papa appeared in the doorway, dressed, his wide leather strap in hand. Papa, I began, where's Stacy? He down at TJ's, Papa. That boy's gotten mighty grown, Papa said, clearly angry. I'm going to teach all of y'all about tracing. Let me look that up. Tracing. I'm sure it means wandering off or going off. Hold on, I couldn't even say it into the
Here's
Google
the
right.
definition
Not
of
trace.
Find or discover by investigating.
Tracing.
Here's the definition of trace.
No, that's not what I... Trace. Let me just put it in. T-R-A... I lost my place, y'all. T-R-A-I-P... Tracing. Traipse. Walk or move wearily or reluctantly, casually or needlessly. Okay. Why y'all tracing off? Okay. I'm going to teach all of y'all about tracing off in the middle of the night, and especially Stacy. He should know better. If Mr. Morrison hadn't seen this door open, I suppose you would have thought you was getting away with something, like TJ. Well, y'all going to learn right here and right now. Ain't going to be no TJs in this house. But, Papa, they hurt Claude, Christopher John cried, tears streaming down his cheeks for his injured friend. And TJ, too, echoed little man, trembling. What? Papa asked, his eyes narrowing. What y'all talking about? Papa, they hurt him real bad, and I could not finish. Papa came to me and took my face in his hands. What is it, Cassie girl? Tell me. Everything. I poured out everything about TJ's breaking into the mercantile with the Simses, about him coming in the night fleeing from the Simses, about the coming of the men and what they had done to the Averys, about Mr. Jameson and the threat of the men to come to the house to get him and Mr. Morrison. And Stacy still down there? Papa asked when I had finished. Yes, sir, but he hid in the forest. They don't know he's there. Papa spun around suddenly. Gotta get him out of there, he said, moving quicker than I thought possible with his bad leg. Mama followed him into their room, and the boys and I followed her. From over the bed, Papa pulled his shotgun. David, not the shotgun. You can't stop them like that. Got no other way, he said, stuffing a box of shells into his shirt pocket. You fire on them and they'll hang you for sure. They like nothing better. If I don't, they'll hang TJ. This thing's been coming a long time, baby, and TJ just happened to be the one foolish enough to trigger it. But fool or not, I can't just sit by and let them kill the boy. And if they find Stacy, I know, David, I know, but there's got to be another way. Some way they won't kill you, too. Seems like they might be planning to do that anyway, Papa said, turning from her. They come here, no telling what'll happen, and I'll use every bullet I got before I let them hurt anybody in this house. Mama grabbed his arm. Get Harlan Granger to stop it. If he says so, they'll go on home. Papa shook his head. Them cars had to come right past his house to get to the Averys, and if he'd intended to stop them, he'd stop them without me telling them so. Then, said Mama, force him to stop it. How? Asked Papa dryly. Hold a gun to his head? He left her then, going back into the boys' room. You coming, Mr. Morrison? Mr. Morrison nodded and followed Papa onto the porch, a rifle in hand. Like a cat, Mama sprang after them, and grabbed Papa again. David, don't use that gun. Don't use the gun. Papa stared out as a bolt of lightning splintered the night into a dazzling brilliance. The wind was blowing softly, gently toward the east. Perhaps, he started, then was quiet. David? Papa touched Mama's face tenderly with the tips of his fingers and said, I'll do what I have to, Mary, and so will you. Then he turned from her and with Mr. Morrison disappeared into the night. Mama pushed us back into her room where Big Ma fell upon her knees and prayed a powerful prayer. Afterward, both Mama and Big Ma changed their clothes. Then we sat very quiet as the heat crept sticky and wet through our clothing and the thunder banged menacingly overhead. Mama, her knuckles tight against her skin as she gripped the arms of her chair, looked down upon Christopher John, little man, and me, our eyes wide awake with fear. I don't suppose it would do any good to put you to bed, she said quietly. We looked up at her. She did not mean to have an answer. We gave none, and nothing else was said as the night minutes crept past and the waiting pressed as heavily upon us as the heat. Then Mama stiffened. She sniffed the air and got up. What is it, child? Big Ma asked. You smell smoke? Mama said, going to the front door and opening it. Little man Christopher John and I followed, peeping around her in the doorway. From deep in the field, where the land sloped upward toward Granger Forest, a fire billowed, carried eastward by the wind. Mama, the cotton, I cried, it's on fire. Oh, good Lord, Big Ma exclaimed, hurrying to join us. That lightning done that. If it reaches those trees, it'll burn everything from here to Strawberry, Mama said. She turned quickly and ran across the room to the side door. Stay here, she ordered, opening the door and fleeing across the yard to the barn. Mama, you better get some water, she yelled over her shoulder. Big Ma hurried into the kitchen with Christopher John, little man, and me at her heels. What we gonna do, Big Ma? I asked. Big Ma stepped onto the back porch and brought in the wash tub and began filling it with water. We gotta fight that fire and try to stop it before it reaches them trees. Stand back out of the way now so y'all don't get wet. In a few minutes, Mama returned, her arms loaded with sacks of burlap. She quickly threw the sacks into the water and ran back out again. When she returned, she carried 2 shovels and several more sacks. Mama, what you gonna do with all that? Asked little man. It's for fighting the fire, she replied hastily. Oh, said little man, grabbing for one of the shovels as I started to take the other. No, Mama said, you're going to stay here. Big Ma straightened from where she was bent, dunking the sacks into the water. Mary, child, you don't think it'd be better to take them with us? Mama studied us closely and bit her lower lip. She was silent for several minutes, then shook her head. Can't anyone get to the house from the Grangers without our seeing them? I'd rather they stay here than risk them near the fire. Then she charged each of us, a strange glint in her eyes. Cassie, Christopher John, Clayton Chester, hear me good. I don't want you near that fire. You said 1 foot from this house and I'm going to skin you alive. Do you hear me now? We nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am, Mama. And stay inside. That lightning's dangerous. But, Mama, cried Christopher John, y'all going out there in that lightning? It can't be helped, baby, she said. The fire's got to be stopped. Then she and Big Ma laid the shovels across the top of the tub and each took a handle of it. As they stepped out of the back door, Mama looked back at us, her eyes uncertain as if she did not want to leave us. "Y'all be sure to mind now," ordered Big Ma gruffly, and the two of them carrying the heavy tub across the yard toward the garden. From the garden, they would cut through the south pasture and up to where the cotton blazed. We watched until they were swallowed by blackness that lay between the house and the fire, then dashed back to the front porch where the view was clearer. There we grazed transfixed as the flames gobbled the cotton and crept dangerously near the forest edge. "That fire, Cassie," said Christopher John, "it gonna burn us up?" "No, it's going the other way toward the forest." "Then it's going to burn up the trees," said Christopher John sadly. Little man tugged at my arm. "Papa and Stacy," said Miss. Little man tugged at my arm. Little man tugged at my arm. "Papa and Stacy and Mr. Morrison, Cassie, they in them trees." The iron-willed little man began to cry, and Christopher John too, and the three of us huddled together, all alone. "Hey, y'all all right?" I gazed out into the night, seeing nothing but the gray smoke and the red rim of the fire in the east. "Who's that?" "It's me," said Jeremy Sims, running up the lawn. "Jeremy, what you doing out this time of night?" I questioned, taken aback to see him. "It ain't night no more, Cassie. It's near dawn." "But what you doing here?" repeated little man with a sniffle. "I was sleeping up in my tree like I always do. On a night like this," I exclaimed. "Boy, you are crazy." Jeremy looked rather shamefaced and shrugged. "Well, anyway, I was, and I smelled smoke. I knew it was coming from this way, and I was afraid it was y'all's place. So I run in and told my pa, and him and me, we come up here. I was afraid it was y'all's place, so I run in and told my pa, and him and me, we come on up here over an hour ago." "You mean you been out there fighting that fire?" Jeremy nodded. "My pa and R.W. and Melvin, too." "R.W. and Melvin?" Little man, Christopher John, and I exclaimed together. "But they was—" I poked Christopher John into silence. "Yeah, they got there for us, and there's a whole lot of men from the town out there, too." He looked puzzled. "I wonder what they all was doing out here." "How bad is it?" I asked, ignoring his wonderings. It get much of the cotton?" Jeremy nodded absently. "Funny thing, the fire come up from that lightning and struck one of them wooden fence pots, I reckon, and sparked that cotton. Must have burned a good quarter of it. Y'all lucky it ain't headed this way." "But the trees," said Christopher John. "It gonna get the trees, ain't it?" Jeremy looked out across the field, shielding his eyes against the brilliance of the fire. "They trying like everything to stop it. Your papa and Mr. Granger, they got—" "Papa? You seen Papa? He all right?" cried Christopher John breathlessly. Jeremy nodded, looking down at him strangely. "Yeah, he's fine." "And Stacy, you seen him?" inquired little man. Again, Jeremy nodded. "Yeah, he out there too." Little man, Christopher John, and I glanced at each other, relieved just a bit, and Jeremy went on, though eyeing us somewhat suspiciously. "Your papa and Mr. Granger, they got them men digging a deep trench across that slope, and they say they're going to burn that pasture grass from the trench back to the cotton." "You think that'll stop it?" I asked. Jeremy stared blankly at the fire and shook his head. "Dunno," he said finally. "Sure hope so, though." There was a violent clap of thunder, and lightning flooded the field. One thing would sure help, though, is if that old rain would only come on down. All four of us looked up at the sky and waited a minute for the rain to fall. When nothing happened, Jeremy turned and sighed. "I better be getting back now. Miss Logan says she left y'all here, so I just come to see about you." Then he ran down the slope, waving back at us as he went. When he went to the road, he stopped suddenly and stood very still. Then he put out his hands, hesitated a moment, and spun around wildly as if he were mad. "It's raining, y'all," he cried. "That old rain a coming down." Little man, Christopher John, and I jumped from the porch and ran barefooted onto the lawn, feeling the rain fine and cool upon our faces, and we laughed, whooping joyously into the thundering night, forgetting for the moment that we still did not know what happened to TJ. When the dawn came peeping yellow-gray and sooted over the horizon, the fire was out and the thunderstorm had shifted eastward after an hour of heavy rain. I stood up stiffly, my eyes tearing from the acrid smoke, and looked out across the cotton to the slope, barely visible in the smoggish dawn. Near the slope, where once cotton stalks had stood, their brown balls popping with tiny puffs of cotton, the land was charred, desolate, black, still steaming from the night. I wanted to go and take a closer look, but for once Christopher John would not budge. "No," he repeated over and over, "I ain't going." "But what Mama meant was that she didn't want us near the fire, and it's out now." Christopher John set his lips firmly together, folded his plump arms across his chest, and was adamant. When I saw that he would not be persuaded, I gazed again at the field and decided that I could not wait any longer. "Okay, you stay here, then we'll be right back." Ignoring his protest, little man and I ran down the wet road. "These kids is bad, need a whooping." "He really ain't coming," said Little Man, amazed, looking back over his shoulder. "I guess not," I said, searching for signs of the fire in the cotton. Farther up the road, the stalks were singed, and the fine gray ash of the fire lay thick upon the road and the forest trees. I want to make a note. So singed is spelled Singed. Most of you that watch this channel are in middle school or whatever, so you might know that, but some people might think it's singed because it's Singed. But if you think about the context of what we're talking about fires and all of that. Singed would be the proper term for that, and I'm going to look it up just so you guys can have the definition. Singed.
Here's the definition of singe.
Slightly burnt or scorched. Okay? So, just a little teaching moment. When you look at it, if you're reading, say, singed, and that doesn't make sense, then you have to pronounce it another way, which is singed. So, farther up the road, the stalks were singed, and the fine gray ash of the fire lay thick upon them and the road and the forest trees. Excuse me. When we reached the burnt-out section of the field, we surveyed the destruction. As far as we could see, the fire line had extended midway up the slope, but had been stopped at the trench. The old oak was untouched. Moving across the field, slowly, mechanically, as if sleepwalking, was a flood of men and women dumping shovels of dirt on fire patches which refused to die. They wore wide handkerchiefs over their faces, and many wore hats, making it difficult to identify who was who. But it was obvious that the ranks of the firefighters had swelled from the 24 townsmen to include nearby farmers. I recognized Mr. Lanier by his floppy blue hat, working side by side with Mr. Sims, each oblivious of the other, and Papa near the slope waving orders to two of the townsmen. Mr. Granger, hammering down smoldering stalks with the flat of his shovel, was near the south pasture, where Mr. Morrison and Mama was swatting the burning ground. Nearer the fence, a stocky man, masked like the others, searched the field in robot fashion for hidden fire under the charred skeletons of broken stalks. When he reached the fence, he leaned tiredly against it, taking off his handkerchief to wipe the sweat and soot from his face. He coughed and looked around blankly. His eyes fell on Little Man and me staring up at him. But Caleb Wallace seemed not to recognize us, and after a moment he picked up his shovel and started back toward the slope without a word. Then Little Man nudged me. "Look over there, Cassie. There go Mama and Big Ma." I followed his pointing finger. Mama and Big Ma were headed home across the field. "Come on," I said, sprinting back up the road. When we reached the house, we dragged our feet across the wet lawn to clean them and rejoined Christopher John on the porch. He looked a bit frightened sitting there all alone and was obviously glad we were back. "Y'all all right?" he asked. "Of course we're all right," I said, plopping on the porch and trying to catch my breath. "What'd it look like?" Before either Little Man or I could answer, Mama and Big Ma emerged from the field with Stacy, the sacks now blackened remnants in their hands. We ran to them eagerly. "Stacy, you all right?" I cried. "What about TJ and Claude?" stammered Christopher John. And Little Man asked, "Papa and Mr. Morrison, ain't they coming?" Mama held up her hand wearily. "Babies, babies." Then she put her arm around Christopher John. "Claude's fine, honey." And she said, looking down at Little Man, "Papa and Mr. Morrison, they'll be coming soon." "But TJ, Mama," I persisted. "What about TJ?" Mama sighed and sat down on the steps, laying the sacks on the ground. The boys and I sat beside her. "I'm going to go in and change, Mary," Big Ma said, climbing the steps and opening our bedroom door. "Miss Fanny going to need somebody." Mama nodded. "Tell her I'll be down soon as I get the children to bed and things straightened out here." Then she turned and looked down at Little Man, Christopher John, and me, eager to know what had happened. She smiled slightly, but there was no happiness in it. "TJ's all right. The sheriff and Mr. Jameson took him in a strawberry." "But why, Mama?" asked Little Man. "He done something bad?" "They think he did, baby. They think he did." Then they didn't hurt him no more?" I asked. Stacy looked across at Mama as if she intended to answer. Then, his voice hollow and strained, he said, "Mr. Granger stopped them and sent them up to fight the fire." I sensed that there was more, but before I could ask what, Christopher John piped, And Papa and Mr. Morrison, they didn't have to fight them old men? They didn't have to use the guns?" "Thank the Lord, no," said Mama, "they didn't. The fire come up," said Stacy, "and Mr. Morrison come and got me, and then them men come down here to fight the fire, and didn't nobody have to fight nobody." Mr. Morrison come get you alone? I asked, puzzled. Where was Papa? Stacy again looked at Mom, and for a moment they were both silent. They both were silent. Then Stacy said, "Y'all know he couldn't make that slope with that bad leg of his." I looked at him suspiciously. I had seen Papa move on that leg. He could have made that slope if he wanted to. "All right now," Mama said, rising. "It's been a long, tiring night, and it's time you all were in bed." I reached for her arm. "Mama, how bad is it really? I mean, is there enough cotton left to pay the taxes?" Mama looked at me oddly. "Since when did you start worrying about taxes?" I shrugged and leaned closer toward her, wanting to answer, yet afraid to hear. "The taxes will get paid, don't worry," was all the answer she gave. "Now let's get to bed." "But I want to wait for Papa and Mr. Morrison," protested little man. "Me too," yawned Christopher John. Inside, all of us went in but Stacy, and Mama did not make him. But as soon as she had disappeared into the boys' room to make sure little man and Christopher John got to bed, I returned to the porch and sat beside him. "I thought you went to bed," he said. "I want to know what happened over there." "I told you, Mr. Grant. I come and got Papa and Mr. Morrison like you asked," I reminded him. "Now I want to know everything happened after I left." Stacy sighed and rubbed his left temple absently as if his head were hurting. "Ain't much happened except that Mr. Jameson tried to talk to the men some more, and after a bit they pushed him out of the way and stuffed TJ into one of their cars. But Mr. Jameson, he jumped into his car and lit out ahead of them and drove up to Mr. Granger's and swung his car smack across the road so couldn't nobody get past him. Then he starts laying on his horn. You go over there?" He nodded. By the time I got across the field to where I could hear what was going on, Mr. Granger was standing on his porch, and Mr. Jameson was telling him that the sheriff or nobody else was about to stop a hanging on that flimsy message he'd sent up to the Averys. Let me go back. He nodded. By the time I got across the field to where I could hear what was going on, Mr. Granger was standing on his porch, and Mr. Jameson was telling him that the sheriff or nobody else was about to stop a hanging on that flimsy message he'd sent up to the Averys. But Mr. Granger, he just stood there on his porch, looking sleepy and bored, and finally told the sheriff, "Hank, you take care of this. That's what folks elected you for." Then Caleb Wallace, he leaps out of his car and tries to grab Mr. Jameson's keys, but Mr. Jameson threw them keys right into Mr. Granger's flower bed and could nobody find them. So Melvin and R.W. come up and pushed Mr. Jameson's car off the road. Then them cars was about to take off again when Mr. Granger comes running off the porch hollering like he's lost his mind. "There's smoke coming from my forest yonder," he yells. "Dry as that timber is, a fire catch hold. It won't stop burning for a week. Get that boy away like he wants them and get on up there." And folks started running all over the place for shovels and things. Then all of them cut back down the road to the Averys and through the woods over to our place. "And that's when Mr. Morrison come got you?" Stacy nodded. "He found me when I followed them men back up to the woods." I sat very still, listening to the soft sounds of the early morning, my eyes on the field. There was something which I did not understand. Stacy nodded toward the road. "Here come Papa and Mr. Morrison." They were walking with slow, exhausted steps toward the drive. The two of us ran down the lawn, but before we reached the road, a car approached and stopped directly behind them. Mr. Jameson was driving. Stacy and I stood curiously on the lawn, far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to hear. "David, I thought you should know," said Mr. Jameson. "I just come from Strawberry to see the Averys. How bad is it?" Mr. Jameson stared straight out on the road. "Jim Lee Barnett? He died at 4 o'clock this morning." "Ooh, that's the man whose shop they broke into, and TJ hit him in the, not TJ, Melvin. Somebody hit him in the back of the head with the gun." "Oh, my God." Papa hit the roof of the car hard with his clenched fist and turned toward the field, his head bowed. For a long, long time, none of the men spoke. Then Mr. Morrison said softly, "The boy, how is he?" "Doc Crandon said he's got a couple of broken ribs and his jaw's broken, but he'll be all right for now. I'm going to his folks to tell him and take them to town. Just thought I'd tell you first." Papa said, "I'll go in with them." Mr. Jameson pulled off his hat, ran his fingers through his hair, damp against his forehead. Then, squinting, he looked over his shoulder at the field. "Folks thinking," he said slowly, as if he did not want to say what he was about to say. "Folks thinking that lightning struck that fence of yours and started the fire." He pulled at his ear. "It's better, I think, that you stay clear of this whole thing now, David, and don't give anybody cause to think about you at all, except that you got what was coming to you by losing a quarter of your cotton." There was a cautious silence as he gazed up at Papa and Mr. Morrison, their faces set in grim, tired lines. "Or somebody might just get to wondering about that fire." "Stacy," I whispered, "what are he talking about?" "Hush, Cassie. Cassie. I keep calling her Cassie. Cassie." "Hush, Cassie," Stacy said, his eyes intent on the men. "But I want to know." Stacy looked around at me sharply, his face drawn, his eyes anxious, and without even a murmur from him, I suddenly did know. I knew why Mr. Morrison had come for him alone, while Mr. Jameson was afraid for Papa to go into town. Papa had found a way, as Mama had asked, to make Mr. Granger stop the hanging. He had started the fire. And it came to me that this was one of those known and unknown things, something never to be spoken, not even to each other. I glanced at Stacy, and he saw in my eyes that I knew, and I understood the meaning of what I knew, and he simply said, Mrs. Jameson's going now. Mr. Jameson turned around in the driveway and headed back toward the Averys. Papa, Mr. Morrison watched him leave. Then Mr. Morrison walked silently up the drive to do the morning chores, and Papa, noticing us for the first time, stared down at us, his eyes bloodshot and unsmiling. I thought y'all would have been in bed by now, he said. Papa, Stacy whispered hoarsely, what's going to happen to TJ now? Papa looked out at the climbing sun, a round red shadow behind the smoggish heat. He didn't answer immediately, and it seemed as if he were debating whether or not he should. Finally, very slowly, he looked down, first at me, then at Stacy. He said quietly, he's in jail right now. And then what? Asked Stacy. Papa studied us. He could possibly go on the chain gang. Papa, could he die? Asked Stacy, hardly breathing. Son, Papa, could he? Papa put a strong hand on each of us and watched us closely. I ain't never lied to y'all. Y'all know that. Yes, sir. He waited, his eyes on us. Well, I wish I could lie to y'all now. No. Oh, Papa, no, I cried. They wouldn't do that to old TJ. He can talk his way out of just about anything. Besides, he ain't done nothing that bad. It was them Simses. Tell him that. Stacy, shaking his head, backed away, silent, not wanting to believe, but believing still. His eyes filled with heavy tears. Then he turned and fled down the lawn and across the road into the shelter of the forest. Papa stared after him, holding me tightly to him. Oh, Papa, does it have to be? Papa tilted my chin and gazed softly down at me. All I can say, Cassie girl, is that it shouldn't be. Then, glancing back toward the forest, he took my hand and led me to the house. Mama was waiting for us as we climbed the steps, her face wan and strained. Little man and Christopher John, let's look up the word wan, because that's not something we use in our everyday language. Wan. I did not say on. W-A-N. Excuse me. Wan definition.
Wan.
Of a person's complexion or appearance. Pale and giving the impression of illness or exhaustion. Pale, weak, strained. Okay. So I had a little wan look to him. Okay, where did I stop? He fled across the lawn and rode to the shelter of the forest. Papa stared after him, holding him tightly to him. Oh, Papa, does it have to be? Papa tilted my chin and gazed softly down at me. All I can say, Cassie girl, is that it shouldn't be. Then, glancing back toward the forest, he took my hand and led me to the house. Mama was waiting for us as we climbed the steps, her face wan, pale, weak, and strained. Little man and Christopher John were already in bed, and after Mama had felt my forehead and asked if I was all right, she sent me to bed too. Big Ma had already gone to the Averys, and I climbed into bed alone. A few minutes later, both Mama and Papa came to tuck me in, talking softly in fragile, gentle words that seemed about to break. Their presence softened the hurt, and I did not cry. But after they had left, and I saw Papa through the open window disappear into the forest after Stacy, the tears began to run fast and heavy down my cheeks. In the afternoon, when I awakened, or tomorrow, or the next day, the boys and I would still be free to run the red road, to wander through the old forest, and sprawl lazily on the banks of the pond. Come October, we would trudge to school as always, barefooted and grumbling, fighting the dust and the mud and the Jefferson Davis school bus. But TJ never would again. I had never liked TJ, but he had always been there. A part of me, a part of my life, just like the mud and the rain, and I had thought that he always would be, yet the mud and the rain and the dust would all pass. I knew and understood that. What had happened to TJ in the night, I did not understand, but I knew that it would not pass, and I cried for those things which had happened in the night and would not pass. I cried for TJ and the land. And that's the end of chapter 12 of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I'm going to read about the author because I think it's important to know about the people that wrote the book. I'm an author. I would like for people to read my little bio. So it says, Mildred Taylor was born in Jackson, Mississippi, which is where this book took place, and grew up in Toledo, Ohio. After graduating from the University of Toledo, she spent 2 years in Ethiopia with the Peace Corps. Wow, so she's a little world traveler, got a little culture to her. Returning to the United States, she recruited for the Peace Corps before entering the School of Journalism at the University of Colorado. As a member of the Black Student Alliance, she worked with students and university officials in structuring a Black Studies program at the university. Wow. See, when I went to school from 2009 to 2013, there was always an African American Studies program in my department, but I heard at my school. But I heard that that was not always the case, and like you had to fight for programs that talked about African American people. And then I'm reading another book called No Disrespect, and this author, Sister Soldier, she too was over the Black Studies program at her school. Very interesting. So she worked to get a Black Studies program at the university. Mildred Taylor's first book about the Logan family, Song of Trees. What? There's another story about them? Won the Council on Interracial Books Award in the African American category. It was also a New York Times Outstanding Book in the year 1975. When was this book published? This book was first published in the U.S. by Dial Books in 1976. Then it was published by Puffin Books in 1991. Oh, wow. Okay, so this story. Okay, so it was also a New York Times Outstanding Book in 1975. The Times called it triumphant, a true story and truly told. Horn Book said, the simple story has been written with great conviction and strength. Other reviews called it absorbing, powerful, a moving story. Now I'm going to have to find the Song of the Trees book. I didn't know that was a book before this, but apparently there was. And this is the sequel to Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, Let the Circle Be Unbroken. So you see this cover art? And you see this cover art with the whole family. But then when I opened the Roll of Thunder book up, it got this cover art. So with it having been an old book that really came out in the 70s and was republished through this publisher in the 90s, that might have been the initial front cover. Not sure. Very interesting. I learned a lot. Well, I enjoyed reading this book. Shout out to all my viewers and the youth subscribers on my YouTube channel. I appreciate y'all. Hopefully y'all will tune in to some other books. Let me know about any other upcoming readings y'all have for school, and I will try to get them read. But thank y'all so much. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.